I'm Jessica Devereaux in Baltimore.
And I'm Paul J.
And welcome to the evening edition of our live webathon in our beautiful Baltimore studios. For those of you that joined us for the afternoon portion, you know a little bit about what you have in store for you. We basically have a panel of guests, some of your Real News favorites, as well as live music, poetry. But really what we want is to hear from you, the viewer. So please send us your questions, tweet us at The Real News, go on our Facebook page, put a post up there, send us a message, and give us a call. We have a line that's open. The number is 1-888-252-8006. That's if you want to donate. But also pick up the phone, let us know what's on your mind, send us an email and all that good stuff.
And so part of what we're doing here, of course, is raising money. And one of the things we want to raise money for is more specialized production, more focused producers. And one of the areas we would like a producer to focus on is our coverage of Africa. Now, of course, this is an enormous thing to cover Africa, so we're going to zero in on a few countries and really focus, and even there, it's enormous, but working with local journalists and local producers, we think we can do quite a bit. We're going to focus a lot on South Africa, particularly the struggle of the miners and what's going on politically there. We're going to, of course, be covering more of Nigeria. And those of you who have been watching know we've been doing a lot of coverage of Nigeria, particularly contextualizing the recent events. But one place we've done a lot of work on, and we want to do much more, is the Congo. And the Congo is one of the largest, most populous countries of Africa, about 75 million people. When Congo was conquered and then owned by King Leopold II, actually that was called, he owned the country. It was one of the most brutal colonizations there were around the world. They used to cut off people's hands in the rubber tree workers, and they would dangle hands in order to show workers if they didn't work fast enough. This is what would happen to them. The United States was one of the first countries to recognize King Leopold's ownership of the Congo, and U.S. policy has been decisive, instrumental in shaping the development of the Congo, including leading to a civil war that killed about 6 million people. It's been called the second largest genocide post-World War II. So now joining us is a panel of some of our favorite guests to talk about the Congo, and Jessica will do the introductions.
Absolutely. Who do we have on here? We have Glen Ford. Glen Ford is joining us remotely. Glen Ford is the co-founder and executive editor of the Black Agenda Report and the author of the book, The Big Lie, an analysis of U.S. media coverage of the Grenada invasion. And we also have joining us Kambale Musavuli. He's from the Democratic Republic of Congo and is a human rights activist and the national spokesperson for the Friends of the Congo. Thanks for joining us, both of you.
Oh, thank you.
Kambale, could you kick us off? Give us a brief sketch of U.S. policy, a little bit of history of the Congo for people that, aren't familiar, and then we'll talk about some of the current issues.
As it relates to the United States, since its modern day funding, the United States had a policy of supporting those who exploit the Congo. Now, you mentioned a moment ago Leopold II owning a land that does not belong to him, and he owned it for about 20 years, where some estimate 10 to 15 million people die under his rule. And the United States, being the first country to recognize Congo as the personal property of Leopold, was not just the only thing they did. You know, they also were part of the nations who were getting access to Congo's resources at the time. Later, after Congo was taken away from Leopold, the U.S. remained engaged in the Congo. Some of us may remember that in the 1940s, Japan was bombed with a uranium bomb. The uranium used to bomb Hiroshima and Nagasaki came from the Congo through Belgian hands. And the U.S. remained engaged in controlling the affairs of the Congo. Later in the 1950s, Congolese had enough of colonial rule, organized democratically through grassroots movement within the country. A leader emerged by the name of Patrice Lumumba, who through the elections of in May 1960, his political party won, and he became the prime minister of the Congo. Within weeks, he was deposed. Within months, he was assassinated with the help of the CIA and Belgium. Even just lately, the State Department has released the classified document of that era, and they still they only released 40%. They still redacted many information in the document, and they show in those documents how since in the 1960s the covert operations were not just assassinating Lumumba, We found out that they actually assassinated a political class in the Congo who had Lumumba's vision. They eliminated them systematically. After removing Lumumba and people who had these political ideas in the 1960s, a dictator was imposed on the Congolese people for over 3 decades. That was Joseph Désiré Mobutu, who ruled by the gun. Anyone who speak up against him was either killed, assassinated, or in exile. And with full backing of U.S. presidents. They invited him many times in the U.S., speaking about Kennedy, Carter, or Reagan. All of them invited him. He was actually George Bush, the father. He's the godfather of some of Mobutu's children. But in the late 1990s, right after the fall of the Wall of Berlin, the United States did not support him as much anymore because there was a new wave or new idea coming out of Bill Clinton, where Bill Clinton, Madeleine Albright created this dogma of the so-called Renaissance leaders of Africa. Now, speaking about African leaders who have bloods under their hands, we're speaking about Zenawi of Ethiopia, who's now dead today, unfortunately. We also have Yoweri Museveni of Uganda, the president of Uganda, and Paul Kagame of Rwanda. Bill Clinton supported those leaders, and as they were in power, the United States supported the invasions of the Congo of 1996, which has unleashed the war that we see in the Congo, 2 wars that have taken the lives of over 6 million people. With everything that I share, what is to remember is that U.S. foreign policy since 1885 has been to support strong men in Africa and ignoring the popular will of the indigenous people of the Congo.
Right, Glen, the policies post-World War II of the United States in the Congo, obviously throughout Africa, but specifically the Congo, were very rooted in the Cold War. It was anything could be rationalized. If it was our dictator and that dictator was anti-communist, was going to stop the Soviets from taking over Africa and so on, that rationalized these kleptocracies and dictators. Since the end of the Cold War, and especially since the presidency of Barack Obama, has anything changed in U.S. foreign policy?
No, and in fact, that's how we know that the Cold War was simply a rationalization for what U.S. imperialism does anyway. In fact, the absence of the Soviet Union has allowed the United States to be even more blatant in its behavior, more undisciplined in its behavior in Africa than before. And we have to see the Congo genocide as part of a pattern of United States behavior. That is, U.S. policy is to bring chaos to those regions that it cannot directly control. Eisenhower, one of his last acts as president, was to tell the equivalent of his National Security Council that Lumumba had to go. But in the interim, the United States and Britain and Israel spent decades undermining Sudan, which was then Africa's largest country, flooding South Sudan with weapons. That decades-long turmoil and chaos led to about 2 million people dying. A huge proportion of them, not because of conflicts between the north and the south of Sudan, but because of conflicts within Sudan, South Sudan, that were exaggerated and aggravated by the flood of weaponry. So now we have a South Sudan that is decimated, that cannot certainly be called a country. It is just another place with oil in which the United States is in control, and that government in Sudan, if one could call it a government, is totally a creature of the United States. And then we see what they are, what they did in the Horn of Africa in 2006 with the invasion instigated by the United States and supported by air, land, and sea by the United States, the invasion of Somalia by Ethiopia. And in no time, the whole of the Horn of Africa is in flames. And this leads almost immediately to hundreds of thousands of deaths. And now we see U.S. attention being focused on West Africa with the creation of an infrastructure of special operations troops as now operate in full force in Central Africa. Special operations troops, the killer elite, whose arrival presages, we know from history, mass death. So Africa is now under a general military offensive by the United States and its NATO allies.
Let's turn and talk about some of the, some people would argue guises for why the United States gets involved in some African conflicts. For example, remember the Kony campaign. That was very going after Joseph Kony. Kambale, we had you on the program discussing that. What about those folks, though? They watch those videos. Your heart is like, gushing because these images are so powerful. And this is a bad guy. No one's here defending Joseph Kony, but what do you say to those folks who are saying, yes, let's send in troops, let's help those children, those little girls in Nigeria and things of that nature? Kambale, can you speak to that?
Yes, what I share with them directly is that we're not asking the U.S. to be involved. They're already involved. Before even Kony 2012, U.S. troops were already operating in that region. So it's just a way of getting the approval of the masses, so they are not shocked that we actually have our troops in the area. And second, think about it. Why is this man, Kony, who's been operating for so long, still not being able to be caught? And we must get troops from the United States to come to Africa. Some of those troops, they can't even live through malaria. What will make them stronger than African soldiers? I'm using a comparison to think about what happened in the Congo. Specifically with the Tanzanian troops and the South African troops operating in the Congo. And then seeing that the actions of that force had some form of impact with military pressure. And then looking at Nigeria right now and having a call of American troops, why aren't we talking to African countries to support the Nigerians before even calling that? So there are dynamics that people are not aware of, and they should be aware that the American military, through AFRICOM, is very active on the continent. And the call for bringing more military is just to get the approval of the masses to pretty much condone U.S. actions on the continent. Africa does not need more guns. A lot of issues can be dealt with diplomatically. And the U.S., unfortunately, because of its history, the best thing that they know how to do is wars. And that's what they're using the U.S. military around the world to advance U.S. strategic interests, rather than saying we are going to deal as human beings. Come to my house. Let's find out how we can work together. But they do want to have access to the resources. That's really what it comes down to. Who is going to control Africa's resources and for whose benefit?
Glen, when Barack Obama was elected, there were reported to have been quite a bit of celebrations in Africa, certainly in Kenya, but in other places. Has he shown any kind of variation on traditional basic U.S. policy towards Africa?
He, in fact, has been more aggressive. We can't separate President Obama's Africa policies from AFRICOM, the U.S. Africa Command itself. AFRICOM came into being, at least officially, in 2008. President Obama comes into office in 2009. So what AFRICOM has done is President Obama's signature. And what has he written? Well, he clearly is intent on embedding a special operations, special forces, killer elite infrastructure everywhere in Africa that he can implant it. And we have to, so when you ask for U.S. intervention, that is what you're getting. You're getting the killer elite. We have to talk about what the special forces do. They're a multiplier force. They train other native forces, African soldiers, to operate the way they do. And those forces become absolutely dependent upon the U.S. Special Operations chains of command. They become independent even of the militaries of their own governments. They are destabilizing by definition, not just because of the independence of their chains of command, but because of their capabilities. And they can only exercise those capabilities in close cooperation with United States forces. They come out of the same machine. So the very existence of these U.S. Special Operations forces and the forces that they train has a destabilizing, chaotic effect on the governments in the region. It weakens African sovereignty. It weakens African nations' ability to build nations. And of course, that is the road to ruin.
Right. The Congo is one of the larger economies in the world. I think it's number 17. It's a very important country in many respects, certainly in Africa, one of the most important. Yet we hear very little. And one of the things we're hearing now, Kambale, is about this campaign about conflict minerals. We're told that in our cell phones there's cobalt, and now there's a campaign on to try to find conflict-free cobalt. What do you make of that campaign?
It's unfortunate that this campaign is actually catching fire. Sometimes when I speak to the students, call the conflict minerals campaign the Conte Pro at the international level. And the reason why I make those type of claims is because we have forgotten the perpetrator of the violence, and we are going after certifying minerals in the hope that militia groups and those who support those militia groups will put down the guns. An American consumer today will be able to get a phone or see a company such as Apple saying that they are conflict-free, while areas in the Congo are still occupied. So this is not actually a Congolese approach. This is a Western approach to deal with Congo's issues. And the reason why this campaign exists is really to muddy the water. Because the moment where the American people know that the American government and American corporations are involved and they know them by name and what actually they're doing, they will take action. But whenever it becomes this mystery, there is no one accountable, let's certify the minerals, and no one is being arrested. Can you imagine that 6 million people have died? The best we can come up with is certifying minerals. No one is talking about any arrest. No one is talking about any court. No one is talking about justice. Where is the justice when we're certifying minerals? But I can tell you what Congolese people are saying. Congolese people want Rwanda and Uganda, who are U.S. allies on the so-called war on terror, to stop invading the country, to stop supporting rebel militia groups in the Congo, to stop looting Congo's resources. Congolese are also saying they want to have a representative government and have the United States out of the political life. Why so? In 2011, when we had the election, the United States was the first country to recognize a fraudulent election in the Congo, making it hard for the Congolese to actually have a say in the democratic process in the Congo.
Well,
so those are the things that
Kabila, John Kerry is saying that Kabila, the president, should now step down. This is who they recognize, and Kerry saying now they want him to step down in the sense that he shouldn't run again. And in fact, they're promising more aid for the Congo if he doesn't run again. So does that show that they've learned something?
Well, for anyone who knows of America's history, their words does not match their action. It's great that Secretary Kerry is making those statements at the moment. It's now up to the people to hold them to their words. Same thing that we do with Barack Obama. He goes to Ghana and say Africa doesn't need strong men, Africa needs stronger institutions. They are the first one to support a strong man in Uganda, Yoweri Musavuli, bringing weapons and U.S. military to support his regime. Same thing with Paul Kagame. They're having him travel to the United States, going to elite universities such as Harvard, MIT, speaking freely in the United States without accountability. So it's great that he's making that statement, but now we have to force them to match their words to the action. That's the struggle that we have now.
All
you
right.
know, we must remind your listeners that the United States suppressed 2 reports from the United Nations that basically indicted Rwanda and Uganda, who are armed to the teeth by the United States as being complicit in the genocide in Congo. So U.S. intentions must always be suspect.
All right, Glen Ford, executive editor, co-founder of the Black Agenda Report, as well as Kambale Musavuli, who is from the Democratic Republic of Congo and national spokesperson for Friends of the Congo. Thank you both for joining us.
Thank you.
And thank you. And let me just say again, we want to do regular coverage about the Congo and some of the other countries of Africa. If that's something you'd like to see, then we need you to click donate, because all this requires producer salaries and producing time, and we can reach out to even a broader range of guests and make this even a daily part of what we do. So if more coverage of Africa interests you, then please click donate or call the number 888-252-8006.
And people have the opportunity to get some cool Real News gear. So here's a little something of what you can expect if you click that donate button or just decide to purchase something at the Real News.